Right, now we're going to have some fun. I'm going to explain to you who is ruling the planet and how it all works. And why when you vote for somebody, they don't represent you, but they represent some mysterious, very influential group who nobody knows who they are. I'm going to tell you who they are, what they're doing and what's going on. So, it started, the way empires were built in the old days with the Romans and with the British was that you had a better army, better military strategy, better technology, and once you conquered, that it wasn't just about conquering somebody. That doesn't give you an empire. You have to then win the peace. And the way you do that is by having efficient and better administration with better technology that brings a better standard of living to your imperial subjects than they had when they were outside of your empire. So the Romans built roads and central heating systems and had entertaining games in forums and all sorts of other stuff. And we built railways and democracy and Christianity, and you know we tried to. Obviously, it's wrong to conquer other nations militarily, but we tried to ameliorate the immorality of our imperialist conquests with winning the peace, which meant, you know, making a fantastic economy and making the standard. So the people said, yeah, all right, we were being ruled by the British, but actually we got, you know, 3 times as much money as we had when we weren't ruled by the British, and we got a miles better standard of living. And to be honest, I don't really want to be ruled by them, but I can't argue that they've made my life worse. They haven't. They've made it better. So that was the original form of conquest that, you know, we gave up on after the Second World War, when we had to give India back, and then gave everybody else their freedom back, and people like Putin and Netanyahu, not so much, but to some extent, they haven't, you know, well, Netanyahu's performing a siege like would happen in Roman times, where you starve everybody and hope that they then, you know, you win some kind of a military victory, and Putin is trying to do the same sort of thing. So that was the original form of conquest in imperialism. Then the French and the Germans came up with this brilliant new form of conquest and imperialism, where what you do is you say, if you want market access to the European market, if you want to be able to sell to Germany and France and Italy and the people who founded the European project, which is an empire. I mean, we had a commonwealth resulting from the British Empire. They went straight to the common market phase without having a common empire phase. It was a brilliant shortcut. And the deal is, if you want market access to the European market, you have to give your sovereignty over to the EU. They pretend you're not giving your sovereignty over, but you are. It's all, of course, cased in deception. It's a kind of... they pretend they're not an empire, they're just an expansion of democracy, and it's all wonderful. But they aren't. They're a contraction of democracy, and they're a violation of the sovereignty of your country. They're usurping of national democracy. Anyway, that's how the French and the Germans and the Italians did it with the EU, and it's not a coincidence. There are 3 horns that get destroyed by the little horn of the EU in Daniel 8, and I don't know if it's in 7 as well, I can't remember. And those 3 horns are the Germans, French and the Italians. They will reap what they sowed. They will completely lose their national sovereignty, having stolen the national sovereignty of 27 minus them other nations. But nonetheless, it was a brilliant form of imperialism, much more smooth and intelligent than our method. But now there's the latest method of imperialism, which is superior to all of these methods, which is the following. What you do is, you say you want to conquer America, and all the Americans are right now complaining that all the senators are bought by Israel, and that basically Donald Trump says America first, but actually his policies are Israel first. And they deduce from that Trump is corrupted and on the Epstein list. That doesn't necessarily follow. Even if Trump wasn't corrupted at all and wasn't on any list, although denying the list exists is not a good idea, because plainly it does. Even if he wasn't, the trouble is that Congress is owned by Israel, and therefore he can't get anything through unless he has a pro-Israel agenda. So if he wants to achieve anything legislatively as a president, he has to act as if he's bought and paid for by Israel, even if he isn't. So how do you get to this position? So this is the brilliance of the plan, the conquest plan. Let's call it an Israeli plan. I don't think it is an Israeli plan. I'll explain why, but let's call it that for now. What you do is you say, well, we need to control about 500 Congress people, right? You know, about 80% of the senators and 80% of the congressmen. And they're going to need about 20 million each. Maybe they need 40 million each. So that would be $20 billion. Right? Now that isn't a lot of money to a big economy. I mean, for example, Britain spends £180 billion, which is more than dollars. We spend over $250 billion on the health service in this country. Right? So it's less than a tenth of our health budget. So, I mean, Israel isn't a hugely rich country, but neither is it poor. So and there are plenty of rich Americans who give it money. I mean, for instance, Larry Ellison, he's worth 350 billion. So he could afford to give 20 or 40 billion just himself. And of course it wasn't only Larry, who can give this money to Israel, shall we say, foreign operatives. And what they do is they buy 500 Congress people. And that costs them, let's say it costs them $20 billion. 14 million each to each congressman. Then what you do is you make sure that, because you control Congress, that some pork is put into the bills. Aid to Israel. Research done by Israelis all over the world into the inside of a ping pong ball. And research done into how long does a hippopotamus stay underwater for on a Thursday, and research into how many crocodiles or how many sharks. This was Elon Musk's favourite one. How many sharks get hit by rockets falling from the sky? Stuff like that. Meaningless research, which is nothing other than a means of transferring funds from person A to person B. So you make sure that the 40 billion or the 20 billion you invested turns into 40 billion of pork, which comes back to you because you control the government. So now you're in a situation, having gone through all of that, where you own 500 Congress people, and you've got 20 billion in the bank from the 40 billion of pork, of which you only had to fork out 20 billion. So now you're 20 billion better off, and you control the US government. Then you move over to the British government and you do the same thing there. Then you go to the European government, and it's much easier to do it with the European government than it is with 27 countries, which is why the globalists love to have huge, great bureaucracies, because they have less people they've got to bribe. You could probably do it by bribing the 20 European commissioners. That's going to be really cheap. Imagine you had to bribe 100 people in 27 countries. You've got to bribe 2,700 people. That's not going to work. You get away with bribing 20 people, that's chicken feed. So what you do is you bribe these governments with their own money. It's an absolutely brilliant plan. And let me take this one stage further. The next stage in the plan is, having got control of all of the governments, I mean, maybe not the Chinese and the Russians, but I know there'll be some control of them too. You then want to control, similar control, of all the people in those nations. And the way you achieve that is digital IDs and CBDCs. Because then you bribe people with their own money, just as you are bribing the politicians with government money. You bribe the governments with their own money, basically. You have to seed it, but once you've got it going and you control them, you get it all back. So you're bribing them with their own money. You do the same with the people. You tell them they've got to convert their money into CBDCs, which you control. And if you want to spend your money, your own money, you've got to do what they say. So you're bribing them with access to their own money to do what you say. It's precisely the same business model that presently operates in the British government, the American government, the European government, and many other governments. We are controlled by money. It is a plutocracy posing as a democracy. It is not a democracy because, as we know in this country, when Starmer gets elected on a manifesto of A, B, C, D, E, within 6 months he's done minus A, minus B, minus C, minus D, minus E, and started implementing all of Tony Blair's policies, which nobody voted for. And so, you know, you could argue that Labour voters are idiots to vote to Starmer, for Starmer, and I do argue that, because the last time Labour were in 14 years ago, they destroyed the economy, and the idea that they're the fix for Tories was idiotic. But nonetheless, you can't blame them totally, because I've never seen a more more deceptive manifesto series of pledges when you compare it with the reality. It's really the opposite of what he promised in every regard. I mean, he's not Labour. He's controlled by big money. So, so that's the physical side of it. Okay, now I'm going to give you the spiritual side of it, which is absolutely fascinating but totally logical. So we have, as you may know, in Daniel 4, there's the malediction 7 times of the Gentile times, also actually the exodenic times for the land inheritance, and also the alienation times for a priesthood. But in particular, the Nebuchadnezzar's losing his kingship for 7 years, it depicts Jesus, actually God's people, losing a king chosen by God over them for 7 times, but then you take a day for a year and it becomes not 7 years, which is 7 times, taking a time for a year. It becomes 20 years, taking a day for a year, because it's 360 times 7, which is 2520. So, and Pharaoh Necho conquered Josiah, and Israel started paying taxes to Necho in 607. And you have 20 years from that, and you get 1914, which is the beginning of the signs of the times of Matthew 24, was nation rise against nation. But there were gaps in that, and that's the continuous prophecy that Russell saw and John Aquila Brown saw before him, but Russell got the dates dead right, but not the fulfilment. But the trouble is that the Maccabees got back sovereignty to the Jews for 98 years, and Jesus was actually Caesar to Israel for 3.5 years, but 4 from Tishri to Tishri and booths to booths. And Jesus was also Caesar to mankind after the end of Satan's lease in 2012. So there's 2 gaps of 4 years each. There's 1 gap of 98 years in it. So when you add that to it, the Gentile times on God's people, which is a malediction on them having a king accepted to God, who's a vassal of God. That malediction ended in 2020, Tishri 10, and Jesus, Tishri 15, and Jesus was appointed Caesar to mankind and has been the king. Christ is king has been a true statement since 2020. That's from the Gentile Times over God's people. But there's another Gentile Times, because the people who ran this up were Israelis. Well, they were Israelites. Now when Pharaoh Necho killed Josiah, he appointed Eliakim as his replacement and changed his name to Jehoiakim so that he sounded more Jehovah-ish, which didn't fool Jehovah, but it did fool Israel to some extent. And to be fair, Jehoiakim paid tributes to Necho, but Necho didn't interfere much with how Jehoiakim ran the country. So the country was still run by a Jewish leader, although they had to pay a tribute to Necho, which they could afford to do. But then in 604 they were conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, who was a different kettle of fish. He actually actively controlled the country. He wasn't just to pay me tribute and I'll get on with doing my stuff. He was, you're mine, I'm taking a whole bunch of you to Babylon as my prisoners, and you're going to do what I say or else. So at that point, the Jews themselves suffered a loss of a Jewish king. And they had to suffer it also for 20 years. Now if you count those, and this was in 604, so if you count those 20 years continuously, which is one fulfilment, you get to 1917, Tishri 15, which was 28 days before the Balfour Declaration of giving Israel a land, made by the Prime Minister Balfour of Britain to Lord Rothschild, and he asked Lord Rothschild to declare it to all and sundry. Incidentally, the conditions on that were they were to not in any way impinge on the rights of the Palestinians who live there, which hasn't happened. Nonetheless, they got given the land by the British in 1917. However, if you now put in the gaps, the 98-year Maccabean gap, and the 4-year gap when Jesus was Caesar to Israel. When Jesus did his ministry, he had to be Caesar because he was resurrecting people, and he was chucking out demons. Chucking out demons is killing demons, sending them to the second death, and resurrecting people is taking people out of the first death. You can't do any of that unless you're a secular Caesar. If you're only a spiritual king, you can give them salvation in the future, but you can't actually do stuff to them right now, physically. So he was Caesar then. Anyway, so if you add the extra 98 plus 8 years to 1917, which is 106 years, you end up at 2023, Tishri 15, which was 2023 October the 2nd, 3rd. It was 4 or 5 days before October the 7th, when the stand-down order was given by Netanyahu as a result of an Al Aqsa mosque, Al Aqsa flood terrorist attack by Hamas, which was triggered by an invasion of the Temple Mount during Booths, the festival, when their Gentile times ended. At the end of their Gentile times, they invaded Booths, the Temple Mount, Solomon's Temple. They invaded it, and the last time they did that, it caused the second intifada. So Netanyahu's administration was totally aware that it would provoke a war. So the idea that they had no idea that October the 7th would occur is complete nonsense. And it's not a conspiracy theory to say that they stood down. They did stand down. 250 hostages were taken by idiots on mopeds with hang gliders against the best army in the world, pretty much. And the place is, as Charlie Kirk described it, a fortress. It's an absolute fortress. What did he say? There's a 19-year-old with an AR-15 every 50 metres at that wall. The idea that they could stand down for 6 hours, just long enough for sufficient hostages to be taken to justify what Netanyahu wanted to do to the place, which is flatten it entirely. And then, as the Israeli Hostages Forum says, every time there's been a chance of getting the hostages back, Netanyahu has sabotaged it. This was a cynical, sacrificial ploy by Netanyahu's administration. But let me explain what's going on here. In 2023, this is who's really ruling the world. It's not the Jews. In 2023, Nisan 24, demon possession began, and it lasts for 2,000 days till Heshvan 14, 2028. And the first 1,000 days, the demons are on a chain. When they come off that chain, which is Shabbat 4 later this year, 2025, the Great Tribulation begins 4 days after that. Just as October the 7th was actually 4 or 5 days after that, or it begins on Shabbat 8, and they come off the train on Shabbat 3-4. Just as the Israeli Gentile Times, or you could even call it the Jewish Gentile Times, but it sounds a bit stupid, that ended on October 2-3, and October 7 began the present genocide and all the ghastly stuff going on in Gaza, where you have Palestinian children being operated on and having amputations because of the bomb damage done to them, with no anaesthetic, by doctors who are scared for their lives. And this is completely unacceptable, and it's obviously a war crime, and it's terrible behaviour. And what people don't understand is it's not the fault of the Jews, it's not even the fault of the Israelis, because Britain is presently ruled by Starmer, who's doing a whole load of stuff that nobody voted for. And Israel is in a worse situation. It's ruled by... Starmer is demonic. I suspect he's demon-possessed, I don't know. But I've never seen anybody so dishonest. And that seems to be a pretty good trademark. I mean, the demons are experts at deception, and he is the most deceptive Prime Minister I've ever seen. And we're in a time period when demon possession occurs. I would be surprised if he isn't. But even if he isn't demon possessed, he's very demonic. Netanyahu will be demon possessed, I suspect, because he's even more demonic. But I don't know. All I can do is surmise. But what I do know, I believe I know, I biblically interpret anyway, is that the demons are behind this plan to rule the world through money. We know this because the sea beast is a banking big tech beast of Revelation 13. It's a financial beast. So it represents financial hegemony of the planet. And we also do know that it's the Jews who basically control, Israelis actually, not the Jews, the Israelis who control Congress. And you might think, well, this is terrible, aren't the Israelis awful people? But the problem is that they're demon possessed. Because the demon possession began in 2023, 6 months before they got headship of the world through... Let me say this. When the Jews' malediction on them having their own head occurred, a head who was a Jew, when that malediction ended, what that meant was that all the Jews in the world had to have a Jewish Caesar. Not the ones only in Israel. It wasn't specific to Israel. The malediction was on all Jews. Now, if they were all in Israel, that would be fine. You'd have to have a Jewish government of Israel, and that wouldn't be a big deal. The problem is there was a diaspora, so they're everywhere. And in fact, Genesis 17 refers to that, because it says, I'll give you all the land of Canaan, he says to Abraham, all the land of your alien residences. And in Abraham's day, that was Canaan, well, now to the Euphrates actually. But and it's given to Abraham, not to Jacob. But today, the Jews are everywhere. They're in every country on the planet, pretty much. So what that means is they've got to be running and there's lots of them in Russia, millions. So basically, they must be running the Russian government. Actually, they have to be. So they bought Russia. They bought Russia. The only country they may not have bought will be China. That's about it. But I very much doubt whether they buy every country in the world except China. So whether they can afford to buy China, I don't know. It might not be so easy. But barring China, for that prophecy to be fulfilled, for all the Jews in the world to be ruled by a Jew, which is what must happen at the end of their Gentile times on Israel, on physical Israel, on genetic Israel, it means that the Jews have to run everything. And the way they are doing that is through money, quite obviously, because we think we're democracies, but we are not. We are plutocracies. And at the top of the food chain is Mossad. And you might think, well, this is terrible, aren't the Jews awful? But put yourself in Satan's position, right? He wants to run the whole world through money. Right? What race would you choose to do that? Okay? You're not going to choose the Nigerians, because it'd be I won't go there. Basically, Jews have a reputation, well deserved, of having a lot of money, because they're very good at earning it. And of the top 10 richest people in the world, 5 of them are Jewish. All right. Number 1 is Elon. He's not. Number 2 is Larry Ellison. He's Jewish. Number 3 is Zuckerberg, he's Jewish. Number 4 is Bezos, he's not Jewish. Number 5 is Sergey Brin, who's Jewish, from Google. Number 6 is Larry Page from Google, he's Jewish. And then number 8 or 9, I think, is Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, he's Jewish. So that 5 out of the top 10 people on the planet, richest by miles, are Jewish. All of those people could afford to buy in the US Congress in its entirety. All 5 of them could. So it's not an issue for them. And incidentally, I must say this, when you can afford to buy the US Congress, you can more easily afford to buy Hamas. They cost nothing compared, and all terrorism is contract work. I got told that by an anti-terrorist guy I knew a long time ago. This was in the days of the IRA. Even then, the IRA was contract work. The terrorist you actually catch is some bloke on a contract. It isn't a member of the IRA. And Hamas is just a contract bastards, basically. they don't act they have nothing to do with Palestine, they have everything to do with money. Just as the government of Britain has nothing to do with the Labour Party, and it's everything to do with money. And the previous government of the Tories had nothing to do with conservatism, it was all to do with money. And this corruption by money has been done by Satan. And Satan, of course, picked the Jews to do it through, because, actually there's two reasons he did it. One, because he doesn't like the Jews, because the whole world was saved through the Jewish race, and he was shown up as a banana through the Jewish race. He hasn't forgiven them for that. Actually, the day will come when he does, but certainly the demons haven't. And so the first reason is that Satan always wants to corrupt something that God's used for a clean and wonderful purpose. Right? So they were always going to be a target, as we saw with the Holocaust. A terrible target of Satan's hate. But they're also the richest on the planet, and therefore he's going to use them to the final end times control through the sea beast of Revelation 13, which is through money. So the world is ruled by demon-possessed members of Mossad and the Israeli, and basically demon-possessed Jews. And it's really important that you understand that, okay, when you're demon possessed, that it's not true that the Jews have more, wicked people in them than anybody else. They don't. We all have exactly the same, I'm sure, all the races. The good guys can become saints, and the bad guys can be possessed by demons, because the demons have an inverse. For all the salvation covenants of God, there are demonic damnation covenants of the demons. All right, and the top of the tree for God is the saints, and the top of the tree for the demons is the demonic angelic covenant. They can be possessed by demons. They have satanic powers, just as the saints can have gifts of the Spirit. So the world is being run by these demon-possessed Mossad, basically, is what's going on. And what they've done, successfully done, brilliantly done, to the governments of the world to control them as an empire for Judaism. No, not for Judaism, for Zionism. It's got nothing to do with Judaism, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. This has nothing to do with Moses. It has nothing to do with Orthodox Judaism at all. It's to do with imperialist Zionists, basically, whose hearts has been corrupted by these demons, and whose bodies have been taken over by them. And there's a lot of demons. I mean, whenever you see in the news, some nutter blows up a mosque, or some nutter blows up a synagogue, or attacks a Christian church, and then it gets amplified like crazy in the news, and you think, oh dear, all Muslims are bad, or all Jews are bad, or all Christians are bad. These are most likely demons who just have a mission: go and cause some crap and make sure it gets in the news, make it bad enough to get in the news. And since the news is controlled by, the media is controlled by the Jews as well. Incidentally, the media is described in Revelation 12 and Revelation 16 as the mouth of the dragon. The dragon is the descended organisation of the demons. So the head of the dragon, which has the mouth, is those who control the media, and the media is, as we know, controlled mainly by Jews again. And so they have been co-opted, the powerful ones, who only the ones who are in a demonic covenant. You have to be a guy with a bad conscience who doesn't really use his conscience very much. You have to be heartless in order to be in a demonic covenant. They've been co-opted, and the world is being run through them. And we already know what they're going to do to the people, because the Bible says it. We will become slaves. It's quite ironic. The whole Jewish race were slaves in Egypt. And now the whole of the greater Egypt, which is this world, will become slaves to the Jewish, not to the Jewish race so much, but to Mossad and the Israeli Zionists. It's to very, very rich guys. And it's incredible how these things work. Reaping what you sow. And whereas we stood by, the British and the Americans did quite a bit to get the Jews out of concentration camps, mainly by defeating Hitler. But now the Jews are going to put everybody else in a concentration camp. with the digital concentration. And it won't just be them. I mean, the problem isn't the demons. Well, the problem is the demons who are doing it, but it's the guys who collaborate with them, who will be every nation there is. That's the test on mankind. Anyway, I just wanted to, so we finally got to understand the significance of the Jewish or the Israeli or the Gentile Times, and it ended 4 or 5 days before October the 7th and 6 months after the beginning of demon possession. And so when you vote in an election, understand what's going on now. The whole trick is to find the party that isn't corrupted by money, and even if you find that party, you don't know that when they get into power they will become corrupted by money. How you measure that, I don't know. I mean, what's needed obviously is some kind of means of removing or calling a general election when a political party got elected on a manifesto and hasn't implemented any of the pledges and done the precise opposite of the entire manifesto. You know, what is the mechanism for getting rid of that government? And but the apocalypse is about to begin. It begins when the gifts of the Spirit are given to Christians, and we start levelling up on the playing field, and you start getting the truth rather than a diet of lie after lie after lie in the media, justifying awful behaviour. So my understandings will hopefully improve a bit more. All of our understandings will, actually. But it is nice, certainly for me, to have some view of how this planet is run. It's been a question I've been trying to answer from the scriptures and from political observation for 10, 20 years. And I believe I now have the answer. It's a brilliant campaign of bribery with government's own money, conducted by the demons through the richest race on this earth, and perfected by demon possession. It wasn't true in 2022 that Mossad and Israel had kingship over every Jewish community in the world. It is true today, I believe, because of the end of that malediction. And it's like a first will be last type thing. But I don't want people to take away from this that it's all the fault of the Jews. It absolutely isn't. The very rich Jews are targets for corruption by Satan because he wants to rule the world through money. And when they are demon possessed, it's not their fault. It's their fault that they were bad, but not their fault the actions of the demons. Most of the stuff you see in the news, and especially this plan to turn the world into a prison camp, is from the demons. The mistake is for the collaborators. Those are the ones who are making the mistake. The Israelis who are not demon possessed but go along with this crap and or help implement it, and the Gentiles who do it, everybody who does it. I mean, he could have picked on any race to do this. He could have picked on Americans, but he because they've got quite a bit of money too, or the Chinese these days. But that's the way it's worked. And be aware that what's happened to governments, how they don't respond to the electorate, and how their money is being used to bribe themselves. That's what's going to happen to you. Your own money will be used against you once you get CBDCs. They will say, unless you adopt totally demonic, immoral, extinction level immorality behaviour that is guaranteed to destroy mankind, unless you behave in a way that's guaranteed to wipe out the species, you won't get access to your money. They're going to bribe you to become a terminator, basically, in moral terms, with your own money. That's the end game. And what they will bring about is death and destruction of the human species through deception and through bribery and through every other means they can think of. And they will fail. But we will learn, because Jesus will step in, but once we've been enslaved by the mark. But we will learn from it not to go down what the end of the road of demonic behaviour is, and why we shouldn't entertain it and never walk down that road. So I hope that's elucidating to everybody. Thanks.